Now art pays. Let's get classical, take it back to Greeks. We're smarter now, we're practically geeks. The Medici family will pay you mad to bloom.
Hello, and welcome today to the Vital Spot. Today we're going to be talking about the Renaissance, which is a time of rebirth throughout Europe. We're going to start, though, specifically today talking about the Renaissance and its start in Italy. As you can see, the boot nation that is behind me. We're looking at a large chunk of time, 1300s to the 1600s, but the ideas of the revolution are timeless, and that's what the Renaissance are timeless, and that's what we're looking at today. My name is Katie Beidelspa, and I want to give you a little bit of background here. This lesson on the Renaissance is going to be relatively brief and concise. This is going to be specifically geared to students in New York State, and a focal point. This will be really useful if you're taking something like a state exam, like the Regents exam. And so hopefully we're going to keep it brief, we're going to keep it concise, and give you the bare minimum, the basic details that you need on the Renaissance to help you pass exams, write a real basic essay. But this isn't where you're going to go for detailed, in-depth information on the Renaissance. All right, so without further ado, the Renaissance. Well, it's a rebirth. It is a time that we see new beginnings. Europe was just getting out of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and in fact, very important in this is the fact that many people in Europe had actually died of the Black Plague, and because of that death and the amount of people that you needed to support and feed and all that sort of stuff was depleted, which allowed the ability you didn't have to grow as much food, you didn't need as many resources, and so because that was a little more, you were able to wrap your head around that, the people were able to supply the food for the people who were still living, they were able to kind of expand the other things that are going on. And as I mentioned before, this begins in Italy, which is a peninsula, home of the ancient Romans, which we're going to see a lot of talking about ancient Rome. And there's two main cities we're going to be looking at, and that's Venice and Florence. And those two city-states in Italy had contact with the Byzantine and the Muslim empires, which had allowed them to flourish and allowed the spread of those ideas throughout their nation. And here's, of course, Europe in general. So, and I meant to mention too that this can be used with guided notes that hopefully I'll get on the link below. If not, please head to my website, which I will definitely put a link to my website to help you out to get the guided notes that go along with this. And your guided notes have this map as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different things that make up the Renaissance. We're going to be filling in this graphic organizer. And the first thing we're looking at is trade. And trade created a wealthy class in particularly, again, Venice and Florence, Italy. And so those wealthy people became patrons of the arts. Well, what the heck is a patron, you may say? A patron is someone who's going to support financially the arts. So my greatest example is if you've ever watched the PBS fund drives, you know, like the channel Sesame Street's on. If you've ever watched those fund drives, if you support PBS financially, you're a patron of PBS. You've given them your money so they can provide you with the TV shows that you know and love. So you'd be a patron of PBS. Well, this is no different than the wealthy merchants of the middle of the Renaissance era. The most important and most memorable family, or there's probably two, there's another one that I'm not really focusing in on today, but the number one is the Medici family. And the Medicis, they're from Florence. They became really wealthy in banking, wool manufacturing, mining, and other ventures. And because of the money, they wanted to show how wealthy they were. So what better than to get some really fancy art? So they said to people like Michelangelo, hey, you build us, you draw us this, you make a statue, and we'll pay you. So Michelangelo was able to paint and sculpt and do all the things he wanted to do because the Medici family was able to fund him. So they gave him money, he made what he wanted to make, and then he'd give it to them, and he was able to kind of make a living off of art. Because just like it is hard today for artists to make money, it was hard for an artist to make money in the Renaissance era as well. So these patrons, people who were willing to pay for the arts, became patrons of the arts. So we also want to talk a little bit about classicalism. Last year, or earlier this year, you probably learned about Greek and Roman in history. And during the Renaissance, there was a revival of Greek and Roman achievements and writing. So a lot of the art and literature that we see in the Renaissance is actually pulling back some of that history, especially that Roman stuff, right? Because we're talking about Italy, and the Roman Empire was in what is current day Italy. So if you look at this statue, it actually looks very similar to what you may remember from your studies of ancient Greece and Rome. However, there are some big differences. They didn't just remake stuff that ancient Greece and Rome have. We're going to look a little bit into that here. So let's talk a little bit about what we got going on here. So like I said, we're having a renewed interest in Greek and Roman cultures and values. So we're going to re-bring those back. We're going to have similar things. For example, the statue that you're looking at right now, that is the statue of David. Please notice too, he's very muscular. His anatomy is correct. Okay? Michelangelo really looked into the human anatomy to really get down, each individual line. You can see the veins on his body. You can see all the elements that are going, on his neck and stuff like that. That you can see that he might as well be real. He might as well be standing right in front of you because he's very realistic. And he improved upon the Greeks and Romans. And again, how proportional, how accurate Michelangelo's The David is. And there's also during the Renaissance a spirit of questioning. And that's very simple, that you're going to start to criticize and think about the ways things used to be done. And there's a lot of people who are doing that. This is going to start something a little bit later on that we're going to call the Enlightenment. But this is the very beginning of that. So the people are going to start to question, why do we always do it that way? Why don't we change? Why don't we grow? Why don't we get better than we used to be? They were criticizing, particularly Europe in the Middle Ages, that that shouldn't have happened that way. This is not the way we should have our lives go. So they're going to question that. We're also getting intellectual and artistic creativity. So there's going to be a regrowth, a rebirth of intellect and artisticness. I don't know if that's a word. And during the Middle Ages, we saw that kind of decline a little while. There wasn't an interest in becoming educated or creating art. It was about survival. It was about that very small group that you might have been a part of. So we're going to see that rebirth, and we're going to see some really cool people come on out of this. One of them is Johann Gutenberg. Gutenberg he's not from Italy. He's German, although we're going to talk about him here in the Italian Renaissance. And then again, we'll talk a little bit about him when we do the Northern Renaissance. But he invents a movable printing press. And this means that we're going to have the ability to read and write all over Europe. So they're able to print the Bible. There's something new previous to this. Only the very, very wealthy were able to read something as important as the Bible. And so everyone else, all of the common people, got their biblical information directly from priests and monks. So they didn't get to analyze, they didn't get to read the whole thing. Now this is made available to the masses. That's the last word that's on there that you can't see for some reason. And there's the printing press. That's what it actually looks like. I think this will be better. The other one we want to look at is Nicholas Copernicus. And Nicholas Copernicus realized that we're not, despite what we want to think, we, the Earth, we're not the center of the universe. We're going to get into him a little bit more when we get into the scientific revolution, but this is really important. he realizes that the sun is actually the center of the universe and that everything else revolves around the sun. He points out that the only thing that revolves around the earth is our moon. The rest of the universe does not revolve around us. Another man that we want to look at is a man named Nicholas Machiavelli. And Machiavelli writes a book called The Prince, in which he talks about how the power of the monarchs was being, they need to re-establish where that power needed to go. That there was too much power in the hands of certain people. And so he's suggesting to them, like, you guys might want to figure out what you want to do with the power you have and utilize it a little bit better. And he says that you need to have the ends justify the means. So that's saying that wherever you want your goal to be, you have to get there using an appropriate way to do it. And he wants to say that you can't justify abuse of power. That it shouldn't be a way to justify the use of power. And then we get some pretty cool folks that you've probably heard of. Okay, we have Leonardo da Vinci, and he is the ultimate Renaissance man. And what that Renaissance man is referring to is somebody who can do it all. He can paint, he can sculpt, he does scientific experiments, he's an engineer, he does it all. He's in the field of science and architecture. He does everything. He's a real Renaissance man, and we'll sometimes use that phrase today, a Renaissance man, someone who can do everything. This is a picture that he drew that's showing the anatomy of the human body and the symmetry that is our bodies. And there, of course, is the Mona Lisa. And this is his flying machine. Again, he was an engineer. It didn't actually fly, but the concept is very similar to what the Wright brothers actually end up doing and what does actually fly. And here's the creation story. This is by Michelangelo Buonarroti, and he started to get religious figures, and he was asked, he was a patron to create the Sistine Chapel, as well as St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. And there's the Sistine Chapel. Do you know Michelangelo painted the entire Sistine Chapel on his back? When he took a shower, it all came off. History humor. Here we are again. Look at, again, elaborate. All the stories that are up on the ceiling too, they're biblical stories, so they're different stories throughout what you'd find in the Bible, illustrations of biblical work. We're going to look at kind of the architecture that was used in the Renaissance age, and we're starting again to see a rebirth back to the ancient civilizations or classical civilizations of Rome and Greece. So we have arches that we haven't seen in quite some time, half circles in Roman buildings, and we're seeing a more human likeness. They have huge domes, and they have columns that reflect like ancient Rome. And that's not correct. This is look at sacralism. And sacralism is the idea that things don't always have to be based on religion. So I always like to give an example at like Christmas time. If it's Christmas time, there's certain things that are sacral at Christmas time. For example, Santa Claus can be used as a sacral object. Santa Claus or snowflakes, you can decorate anywhere you want with Santa and snowflakes, and no one's going to have a big deal. It's not a religious symbol. However, putting something up like a manger or a creche to show the birth of Jesus is now a religious Christmas symbol. So that's the difference between secular and religious. And so what we're seeing in the Renaissance is this birth of secularism, the idea that not everything needs to be based on religion. Also, people started to begin writing in the vernacular. What the heck is vernacular? Yo, that, believe it or not, is some form of vernicularism. Okay, so when you're all hanging out with your friends, yo, okay, I'm making this up a little bit, but when you're hanging out with your friends, you're hanging out and you're talking in a different language than when you go to school and you talk to your teachers, right? Or at least I hope so. Or when you're talking to your friends, talk differently to your grandparents. Because you're using a vernacular, you're using a language that is spoken to the people you're with. And in this case, writers started to begin to write in the local language or dialect that was used instead of far-off Latin that everyone else was using it. And some two main examples is Dante's writes the Divine Comedy, and where he tells of his world going through hell. So he's giving our epic journey of hell. We also have a man named Joseph Chaucer who's writing the Canterbury Tales, which is a story of travelers in England and the medieval lives that they have and all the different travels they have as they're going through Europe. So these are some examples. Notice, no religion in there. They're making that up, except, hell can sort of be religious. So secularism is using a non-religious view of the world. So our next one we're looking at is humanism. The name says it all. It's glorifying our human power, what we are as humans, how awesome the human mind is, how awesome the human body is, how awesome we as humans are, that we are that we're amazing because we can think and we can reason, and we're going to really grow that. It's not all about God being the only one with greatness, that all humans are too. And what we start to see is in the art, in the depictions of art that we see during the Renaissance, we see this humanistic world to not only to our ordinary humans, okay, but also to the higher ups, like here in Raphael's painting of the Madonna, which is Mary, mother of Jesus, right? We're seeing Madonna or Mary painted the same way as any other person would be. She looks like an ordinary mom. I understand this is a different time frame. She doesn't, moms don't dress like that now, but she's a loving mother who's showing off her young child. And also the people around her all have their own looks, their own feel. You can see different parts of their body. Again, you can look at like their neck, and they all look very realistic. And that's seeing the humanism in them, the humanity in people in the Renaissance art. And that has to do again with humanism, the idea that we're going to see the human form. So naked people kind of equals humanism. So we also see in one of the most famous pieces of Renaissance art, in the Last Supper here, that each one of the saints depicted in this picture and Jesus all have their own individual look to them. They're all distinguishable. You can, I'm going to point to wrong things, but there's a long bearded man on one of the far ends. He's the second guy in. I can't tell which side's which on my green screen. But that's St. Jude, because that's how he's depicted. He's depicted the way St. Jude is now always depicted. He's got the big long beard. So you can actually pick out each of these different saints if for any reason you wanted to do so. And that's very important, because if not, they're in the past, they'd all been kind of depicted to look the same way. And these people who studied humanism are called humanists, and they believed that humans had the ability to reason and to show logic, and it was important that we do this, because this is our world and how we're going to make our growth. And they celebrate our accomplishments as humans, and look to the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. There they are again, the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, a rebirth of culture based on the ancient Greek and ancient Romans. And here we're seeing Michelangelo's version of Moses. And he's paying attention again to anatomy and his power and his individualism. And that brings us to our last thing, which is individualism. That we all have our own little individual achievements to look at. So we can take a look here at two, we're going to compare. We're going to look at a mosaic from the age of Justinian, the Byzantine Empire, and then we're going to look at a Renaissance figure. So there is our age from the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so you can see they all look relative. Look at all these people over here. They look almost identical. No individualism there. And now, look, they're wearing different things. Their hair is different colors. They're dressed in different way. Their body types are different. So everyone looks different in all of these images. So thanks for taking a few minutes to join me to learn a little bit about the Renaissance, which starts in Italy in the 1300s through the 1600s, where we talked about the different elements that make up the Renaissance. We talked about trade and classicalism, questioning. We talked about intellectual and artistic creativity. We talked about secularism and humanism and individualism. We talked about this very briefly to help us get through and understand the basics of the Renaissance. I have you become a real Renaissance man yourself or woman and go more into detail. Learn more about these Renaissance artists. Learn about the books and things that are of the Renaissance time. The Renaissance is important too because it's our real start into what will be the world to come. With the Renaissance, after that, we're going to be looking into the scientific revolution, followed by the Enlightenment. And both of those things are based off the Renaissance. Those ideas that these great men gave us really takes us into the rest of our world, which really takes us into where we are today. So I thank you for joining me here on the Vital Spot. If you have any questions, please post below, and I'll try to get back to you. I thank you for learning with us here today.
Nobody's thinking 'cause it's cool to be dumb. Stand up. There's no art, just guns and greed. Stand up. You need a Renaissance. Stand up. They're sick of eating the same thing for lunch. Stand up. Nobody's thinking 'cause it's cool to be dumb. Stand up. There's no art, just guns and greed. Stand up. You need a Renaissance. Stand up.